I see you. Your eyes. Your hands. Your chips. Everything. So I don't need to see your cards. We play at fulltailpoker.com.
I'm Diego Cortez.
Adam Schoenfeld.
Welcome to The Scoop. Full Tilt Poker presents The Scoop. Today we have a special guest who has made his mark now in the World Series by winning a big 6-max no-limit tournament. But for people who play on the internet, he really is a legendary player in the Limit Hold'em, and now he's expanding to other games. But
True internet legend.
people know him more as Haas TBF, and for a long time people didn't know who Haas TBF is, but it's Matt Hawrilenko, and he's one of these super smart X-option traders who started playing poker. And
He knows the sigma, the divided by sign. He knows all of
He
it.
hangs out with Bill Chan and Terrence Chan and these guys, and it would have been better if he'd stayed in the options trading.
Yeah, for us.
In the Full Tilt bio they put up, it says in a couple of places that you have a math-based approach to Limit Hold'em, and that you use your math skills. And of course, that's always considered kind of a backhand compliment. Mm-hmm. But to what extent is that just hype, or what does that really mean?
Well, I do take a math-based approach, but I also think that separating like the math-based approach from the more whatever gamesmanship approach is a false dichotomy, because I think the two can and should work together. So yeah, I met Bill Chen and Jared Ankerman pretty early in my poker career, and of course they wrote the Mathematics of Poker.
Yes.
Those guys are smart.
Yeah, those guys are smart. Yeah.
I've known Bill a long time, but we had Bill on the show, and of course we were
follow his
pretending like
equations.
we were keeping up with him, but
Yeah.
he takes it to a different level. He's a math PhD.
Yeah, but I mean, ultimately, I think the two approaches get you to a very similar place, which is, beyond like, when people hear math-based approach, they think, oh, so, immediately they say to me, oh, so you play the percentages and stuff like that. And it's like, well,
That's
yeah,
an
but
arithmetic-based
no,
approach.
like, I generally say that that's the language you need to speak to talk about the game. Mm-hmm. So, so I think there's a lot of valuable stuff that math can contribute. So obviously computers can't attack like the whole real game of poker because the game tree is so big. There's so many different decision nodes. But like what Bill and Jared do, and what I've like tagged on, try to understand as they do it, is they create toy games which look kind of like real poker, which are solvable, are tractable, and can provide inferences into the bigger game. So, I mean, that's about what, that's what it is. And it's kind of saying, well, here are the types of hands that you need to value bet, and here are the types of hands that are most profitable to bluff, and here are about the approximate ratios of that. But now as your read changes or whatever, you obviously have to weight that more. And so in that sense, the two can be used in conjunction.
I mean, one thing about math is that it seems misunderstood just as a term, and that people really do think it refers to arithmetic or mathematics. And obviously, it's much more about logic and game theory and becoming non-exploitable, I suppose. Yeah. But I mean, what would be kind of a concrete example of a game that you'd adapt to Limit Hold'em, which is where you're best known, which maybe would surprise people as being an example of math, which they don't even think of as being mathematics.
Well, I guess the first thing I can think of is the Ace King Queen game, and I think it was Mike Caro who originally came up with this game, where basically there's one street of betting and a deck with 3 cards, and there are 2 players. You get an ace, a king, or a queen, and the first guy has the option to, or the first guy automatically checks, and the second guy has the option to bet or to check. So how do you play this game? Well, first thing you kind of come to realize is you should bet your aces all the time. And then what do you do with your kings? And, well, if you bet your kings, the guy's going to fold his queen, and he's going to call with an ace. So that's clearly negative EV. But then, if you only bet your aces, now, the guy's just...
Eventually he'll catch on.
He's going to catch on, right? So you also have to bet some queens, like depending on the pot is, like you bet your queens a third of the time if the pot is whatever, too. And so now he'll have to call with some kings to keep you from bluffing. And there are situations a lot like that in Limit Hold'em. Without like giving specific hands, like it's pretty obvious to players when they get in these spots, or it should be, that when you have a hand that can only be that can beat a bluff, but isn't going to isn't going to bluff out any other hands, like this is the ace king queen game. Like if you have fourth pair on a king queen jack 7 deuce board, and you see people like trying to bluff it or whatever.
It's exclusively a bluff catcher.
It's a huge mistake, and that you can derive straight from the ace king queen game.
If you see someone make that kind of mistake once, do you feel like you now own them?
Own is a big word, but I feel pretty excited to be at the table with them. Yeah,
I thought these are more formal.
Yeah, I feel pretty excited to be at a table because like mistakes like that are like very clearly mistakes. I don't care, who it is doing.
Right. There's no way to defend it. Sometimes I feel like people get a bad rap. They might be trying some very aggressive play. It has a chance to succeed, but you see other plays where people make certain calls or certain plays that there's just no possible way to defend it. There's no thinking, there's no history they could have had with a player that would justify it. And then you know that that's got to be a poor player. They've got some weakness.
Matt,
so I'm sorry. I was going to say that the other thing that you could take from the ace king queen game, and there's the 0-1 game, which I don't need to explain. But the gist is, what sorts of hands should you bluff with? In the ace king queen game, you bluff with the queen, clearly, right? It has no value other than as a bluffing hand. So when you start looking at Limit Hold'em hands, the way I look at Limit Hold'em is I think, okay, given the sequence of actions, like what hands can I reasonably hold? And I try to, on this river and such board, and I try to balance it between, my strong value betting hands and my bluffing hands. And what hands are most profitable to bluff? Well, the very worst hands in your range. And if you kind of look at an EV graph, right, like the king highs, the queen highs, well, they're too good to bluff. Like maybe you'll bluff out some better hands, but like they have so much showdown value that if you should have, whatever 1 over p plus 1, 10% of your range should be bluffing hands. Like you should be bluffing like the missed straight draws, like in the very the 5 highs, like the 6 highs, and those hands just gain so much value. And again, you can get that straight from game theory, but it's something that a lot of good players can intuit without game.
Are you playing mainly now heads up, or the shorthanded, or full ring, or a mix?
Well, I was playing mainly heads up for a while, but those games don't go so much anymore.
Right.
So I've actually transitioned to playing a lot of mixed games. I love playing mixed games. It's interesting, and as much as I love Limit Hold'em, it does get a little old after a while. So I've been playing 8-game mixes, like Horse, or the Horse plus No Limit Hold'em, Polynomial Mahan, Triple Draw.
It's much more fun. Although in terms of what you were describing as a mathematical model, heads up is kind of the ultimate place to apply those pure mathematical approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. Because
as opposed to a multiplayer game.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight actually. Like once you get 3-handed and beyond, like just all sorts of strange stuff happens. Things are called collusive equilibria, which is not to be confused with actual collusion. It's just
it's a passive collusion.
Like the best example I can think of is if the button raises in a 3-handed game, and then the small blind now has the choice to 3-bet or to call, or of course fold, right? And if he calls, he's hurting the button and helping the big blind. And if he 3-bets, he's hurting the big blind and helping the button. And for him, it's probably close to an EV neutral decision, but like all these strange things start to happen in multi-handed games.
I mean, if they do come up with a computer that can actually beat top-level players, or or a real super bot, the first one you would imagine would be a heads up.
The first one for a very, 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 very long time will be heads up. Like heads up poker is so much smaller than 3- and 4-handed. Like, yeah, I think heads up Limit Hold'em is in danger of like having some good bots come out. Like the Sox bot, I played it last year. It plays pretty well, and at some point, like it's hard to say, does it play better, does it play worse, because you kind of get a sense of what it's doing, and you just think, well, I'm right, and it thinks, well, I'm right, and you don't really know until you play like 100,000 hands against it. But
it's probably exponentially harder to have a 3-handed bot.
Way
beyond exponentially for
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a
high
long way
exponent.
off.
Yeah, right.
What you mean? I mean, we've talked to a bunch of people who played in those big corporation games against Andy Beal, and obviously he was very smart in that he defined the game as heads-up limit hold'em, which is the game that's going to give him the best chance to win. It's almost not poker. I mean, it is poker, but it eliminates a lot of the poker skills that would take him a lot longer to acquire.
Like, which skills are you talking about? Because I think it's like the ultimate poker. That's what I think.
Well, maybe that's a difference of semantics. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, in terms of what we think of all the skills that go into being a well-rounded poker player that you acquire in terms of, you know, reading other players and manipulating other players and managing yourself in a multi-way pot based on other people's characteristics, you don't have to worry about any of that. You can come up with a model that optimizes how you play every hand, or no. I mean,
You can, you can try to come up with a model, but it's people.
I mean, he did.
He was trying to make himself a bot.
Okay.
He was trying to make himself a bot, in effect, which is simpler heads up than it would have been in a full ring.
Right. Yeah. Actually, that was one of the first poker books I read. I read it right after I qualified for the main event. And it's a really cool book. I mean, I think a lot of this stuff is more subtle, but you know, one of the things I like about it, you know, you can skin a sheep once, you can shear him many times, or I guess you're supposed to say that the other way around. But you know, like if you make these subtle adjustments in big play, like I'll often, if I think I'm exploiting a player, I'll often not try to go too crazy with it, because actually this favorite quote from Harry Potter when let's see, Cornelius Fudge is talking to the Prime Minister of Britain, and the guy asks him, you know, so there, you know, these dark wizards, why can't you stop them? You know magic. And he says, but the other side knows magic too, Prime Minister. And it's true, right? Like, people do catch on that you exploit them if you start exploiting them too much. So I like to do it around the edges. In that sense, like, I feel like I can prolong my edge for longer.
Do you feel when you're playing heads up limit hold'em, and then let's say like you say, you're exploiting someone, and you're just beating on them. Now you obviously have to, and they start tilting. You have to adjust to that. You can't just keep doing the same thing.
Oh,
right?
for sure you adjust to it, but again, I think making like these really big course corrections is a dangerous precedent to set, because you know, a lot of times you think someone's tilting and they're just catching like a lot of times people think I'm tilting, and they're like, yeah, you really tilted in that game. Like, no, I actually just caught like a lot more of hands like a lot more bluffing hands than I usually would. And like when I have the bluffing hand, yeah, I always bluff with the bluffing hand. And you know, like people say, oh, you're tilting, you were playing like a maniac, or you're playing so passive. And like I hear all these things. It's like, no, I'm always playing the same game. You're seeing a small sample size, and you're reading too much into that. You know, we like to see patterns and things, like whatever it is, it's just the way our brain works. But oftentimes they're not there, and we're misleading ourselves.
Especially if you watch a heads up match, especially from the outside, you can draw all sorts of fanciful tales about what's happening, and none of it may be true, or some of it may be true. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
I mean, more important, it seems like it's more important to play your hands optimally and be aware of the image that is being created, which may be a false image just based on how the hands have gone. I mean, in other words, you get a lot of hands, you play them, and you play them aggressively, and now you have to factor in the fact that the other guy thinks you're a very loose, aggressive player, which actually has just been dictated by the hands that have been dealt and how they've played out, or vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true, and I suspect that's much more true in No Limit than it is in limit games. Like, guys are asking me all the time for like my read on such and such a player and such a player. Is he a maniac? Is he this? Is he that? And usually I'm like, I don't really know. I just play my hands, you know. like certainly I think I get more of a read when I play live or when I try to play the big bet games. But I think there's a lot more valuable stuff that most people can focus on before they start worrying about that stuff, because that stuff definitely helps around the edges. But if you don't have a strong strategy to start with, and in my opinion, the vast majority of limit hold'em players don't. Although, I mean, don't get me, there are tons of great players, but
or if people have a good strategy and they let that stuff make them deviate.
It can corrupt it. Yeah, absolutely. So I think for pretty much anyone, you know, when I was playing ring games or whatever, I was winning like a little over 3 bets per 100, which I think is pretty good in like a 6-handed game. And you know, I think
very good.
Or even like a heads-up game. I think if I were a great exploiter, like you know, like Phil Ivey type great exploiter, it probably could have added like maybe another half a bet to a bet. So really, like, you can do really, really, really well without worrying about that stuff. And I know that's the fun stuff to think about, but it's not the most profitable stuff to think about.
Thanks for joining us on The Scoop, brought to you by Full Tilt Poker.
Full Tilt is the label that pays me.
And not surprisingly, Matt Hawrilenko has turned out to be very articulate,
Delightful.
very interesting. And we've talked a lot about limit hold'em, but he also has tournament triumphs and other aspects of poker to talk about.
A little annoying that now he's winning at no limit as well.
I fear that he'll be winning in many
Other
arenas.
disciplines.
So we're going to bring them back next week. And in the meantime, write to us at thescoop@cardplayer.com.
I've seen just about everything. Seen queens overthrow kings, and straights flushed away. I felt the sweat after every re-raise, and nearly buckled after bad beats. Seen rags lead to riches, and witnessed countless miracles on the river. So if you want to play, take a seat and show me something I haven't seen. We play at FullTiltPoker.com.